Hey everyone, it's Sherry Vegas, and in this tutorial today we're going to be creating another textured wall art piece. These videos have been so popular and I do have a full playlist on it, so feel free to go and check out my playlist on all the other types of textured art you can create. But today we are going to make it something so simple and easy to do that no matter what your skill level is, you can do this one. To start off with, I'm mixing up some textured paste and I'm using a multi-purpose joint compound. I normally use a different sort of textured paste recipe, so if you watch my other tutorials on textured art, I do use a different sort of mixture, but I got told that this is a really good one, so I'm going to test it out in this video. So it requires some joint compound, PVA glue, and I'm kind of just doing this off by feel and eye. So I'd say 3 parts of the joint compound, maybe half a part of PVA glue, and then a part of my textured paste medium, and this is an art medium. I'm told that the PVA glue actually helps the texture paste from cracking, so it'll help prevent it from cracking, so it'll be really interesting to see if that actually does work. But then I give this a really good mix up. You want to mix out all of those lumps and bumps and make sure all 3 parts are combined properly. I like to do this in a plastic container so that way I can then just put the lid on afterwards and it doesn't start to dry out straight away. To create my geometric design for this wall art, I'm going to be using cardboard, but if you want to go super fancy or super professional, you can always use MDF and cut out your shapes that you're going to use. The reason why I'm not doing that is, one, because everyone has cardboard on hand. I always have a bunch of cardboard and it lets me recycle it, and also two, cutting out all of these shapes would require some woodworking tools, and I don't have that many, so I decided to go with cardboard because it's the easier option. So I'm using cardboard and then I'm just using a Stanley knife to cut this out. I just happen to have a mini circle artwork that I did up ages ago that was the perfect size circle for what I need for my design, so I just traced that and then went from there to create my arches. So I needed to have 2 half arches plus 2 circles the same size for the design that I'm doing, and I want to center my circle into the middle of my canvas. So once I did that, I also marked that out, and then I'm just using PVA glue to glue it down to my canvas. I don't need to use any glue that's too strong because I am going to be adding the texture paste on top, so there's no chance of this moving. And with my circle in place, I then just started to place my arches over the top and just adjusted them. You might need to cut them down or change them a little bit depending on how you want it to overlap. And of course, you can do whatever geometric sort of design you want. This is just the one that I came up with. Now, I did make a mistake here. I should have waited to measure out my second circle pieces before I did start to glue these down. I also did realize too that the part where the arch is going over the circle, you're going to have it uneven because obviously that cardboard is lifting up to cover that. So I then just cut out these little squares from the cardboard and place those down just so that way my arches are going to be nice and even and they're not going to have a dip going down the edge of them. So just like little mounts, so that way it's the same sort of height the whole way across. This is where I realized I had made a mistake and I shouldn't have glued my arches down straight away before I traced the outline onto my second circle, because I want my circle to be coming over the top of these 2 arches. So what I've done is just quickly got a pen on the original circle, trace that outline so that way I know where to cut out, and now I'm just using my second circle and placing that down and then placing my arches over the top of this new circle. Then from that second circle, I cut those 2 new pieces out and layered those over the top. I did also end up cutting out another 2 pieces just because I felt like the design needed something on either end. Once you're happy with how your shapes are looking, you can then start adding your texture paste on. Now, it's really tempting to want to go super thick with texture paste so that way you don't have to do as many layers, but with textured paste, they do tend to crack if you do layer them up really thick. So you want to do lots of thin layers and build it up that way than trying to do just 1 or 2 layers really thick, because by the time it dries it will be really cracked. So thin layers are the way to go when you are working with textured paste, and you also want to make sure that you give it enough drying time in between each layer, because once again, if you don't give it enough drying time, you're going to have issues with that textured paste cracking, because the bottom layer is still going to have moisture in it, and then you're applying a new lot of textured paste on top and it's going to end up moving, or you're going to have too much moisture and it will end up cracking. So I normally wait around 3 hours before I do each layer, just depending obviously too on what climate you're in. So it's getting a bit colder here, so I might have to wait a little bit longer as I start to make more textured art, because it's going to take a little bit longer to dry. You can also see here this first layer is really rough, but that's okay because I'm going to keep layering it up, and the more layers I put on it, the smoother it will become. So the first layer can be really rough. We're just trying to get that layer down. I did get some cracking, but only in those 2 spots, and I think the reason behind that was there was PVA glue on those 2 pieces facing upwards, if you can remember, because I had to change the circles and there was that old PVA glue still on it. So I think that's why I only got cracking in those 2 spots. And this is the second layer that I'm doing. So this has had enough time to dry, and I'm just going to be adding this on. Now, after your first layer, you want to make sure that you are taking a little bit more time to layer it up, and this is now onto the 3rd layer, because we want to make sure we're getting it as smooth as possible, because it's going to mean less sanding. If you just keep applying these layers super roughly and not take time to kind of use your paintbrush to smooth around those edges, it just means you're going to have to do more sanding when it does come to that final layer and finishing the piece off. So kind of after that first layer, I just take a bit more time with my paintbrush and really smooth it out. Then once I was happy with how it was looking, and I think I did either 5 or 6 layers in total, I did lose count, I'm just going to be using some sandpaper and just taking down any sort of harsh edges or any sort of areas that I'm not completely happy with. I did start with 600, but I ended up swapping to 200 grit because I found it was just taking me forever to get it smooth. So if you haven't worked with sandpaper before, the higher the number, the finer the grit, the lower the number, the rougher it is. So use whatever sort of grit sandpaper you want, and you can use a few different types if you need to. I then decided to paint it with this Liquitex unbleached titanium, but I didn't really love the color as I started putting it down, so I ended up changing the color a little bit. I knew I wanted like sort of a creamy nude color, so I added some white, added some pink, and changed it up that way. And I'm just using, standard acrylic paint, and then just went over and completely painted my artwork. Depending on the finish that you want to your artwork, you can also use spray paint to paint it. I wouldn't recommend using a roller just because it does have all these different levels and it will be hard to get a roller around. So if you don't want brush marks in your piece, use spray paint, paint it that way. But I did find that once it was fully dry, I just wasn't 100% happy with the finish. I felt it looked a bit flat. And I decided I wanted to go back in, and this time to sort of keep that texture in, I'm going to get some more textured paste but color it and do my final layer that way. I know I just spent all that time sanding it and then painting it, but I just felt it looked flat without that sort of textured finish to it, and the sort of acrylic paint with that sort of semi-satin look just wasn't working for me, and I did really want a matte sort of textured finish. So once again, just adding my acrylic paint in, mixing that through some more of the exact same textured paste I use. I did switch to a really finer brush so that way I would get a little bit more of a clean finish, and I just took my time making sure I don't have any lumps or bumps that are going to need sanding out. And that way I'm going to get a really smooth but still textured finish to my piece. And the absolute last step I did was just getting a bit of paper towel and pressing that in just to stipple that across onto the 2 corner pieces, just so I had a little bit of difference in texture. And it's a very, very tiny detail, but I feel like in person it just adds a little bit more dimension and still gives it a really cool textured finish by just stippling those 2 areas.
So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and like always, if you are new to my channel, please do subscribe, as I have got a bunch of videos on this topic as well as many other different art styles. And if you did get benefit out of this video, please give it a big thumbs up. It really helps me out. And don't forget that if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below, and I'm always happy to answer them.